Alistair, the sixth Duke of Blackwood, did not believe in sentiment. He believed in ledgers, in yields per acre, in the cold, immutable calculus of profit and loss. His heart was a well-ordered estate of its own, with feelings kept in their proper, distant pastures and logic reigning from the grand house. It was this precise and unsparing world-view that he brought to the matter of the Lowick holding, a minor property on the farthest edge of his inherited lands, which had come to him upon the death of a third cousin twice removed. The estate was a negligible asset, poorly managed and bleeding coin, and at the heart of the rot, according to the terse report from his solicitor, Mr. Pembroke, was a bookshop. "The tenant is a Miss Elara Vance," Pembroke had stated, his voice as dry as old parchment. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at the Duke over the rims. "The property has been in her family for 3 generations. The previous landlord, your late cousin, was lenient. The rent is significantly in arrears." Alistair scanned the figures. The numbers were an offense. Lenient is a gentle word for derelict. She is a liability. "She is, by all accounts, a woman of great kindness and learning," Pembroke offered. "A rare and fragile defense. The townspeople hold her in some affection. She has had a series of misfortunes, illness in the family, a poor harvest affecting the town's custom." Alistair waved a dismissive hand, the gesture sharp and final. He had no patience for the messy, unquantifiable business of misfortune. It did not appear on a balance sheet, except as a deficit. "Affection does not pay for roof repairs, Pembroke. Kindness is a currency with no exchange rate. Her kindness will be exploited by all, and will pay for nothing." "Inform her the lease will be terminated. We will sell the building. It is the only logical course." There was a pause, a very slight, very careful pause that was the closest Pembroke ever came to outright dissent. Might I suggest a visit, Your Grace?" "Lowick is not so far. To see the situation for yourself, before we proceed. Public perception can be an asset, or a liability, of its own." Alistair considered this. The solicitor had a point. An eviction, poorly handled, could become a tiresome local drama. Very well. He would make the journey. He would observe this Miss Vance and her failing enterprise. He would confirm his assessment in person, and then he would instruct Pembroke to execute the eviction with swift, surgical precision. It was a matter of simple, unavoidable arithmetic, nothing more. He imagined a flustered, weeping spinster, overwhelmed by the world, a woman whose softness was her undoing. He felt not pity, but a cold intellectual irritation at such inefficiency. 2 days later, he arrived in Lowick, unannounced and dressed not as a duke but as a man of modest means, a gentleman traveler with an interest in provincial architecture. The town was small, a huddled collection of stone buildings along a sluggish river, and there, on the corner of the main street, was the bookshop. Vance's Volumes. The sign read, the lettering faded, the wood weathered to a soft, silvery gray. The shop front was not promising. The windows were clean, but the display within was sparse, featuring a few leather-bound books whose titles were obscured by the afternoon glare. It looked less like a thriving business and more like a quiet memorial to one. He pushed open the door. A small bell chimed, a lonely, tinny sound in the quiet. The air inside was cool and smelled of old paper, leather, and something else, a faint, clean scent of beeswax. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slanting from the high windows. Books were everywhere, not in neat commercial stacks, but in towering, precarious columns that seemed to defy gravity. They lined the walls to the ceiling, filled alcoves, and created narrow canyons through which one had to navigate with care. It was not a shop. It was a library that had forgotten its purpose, and in the heart of this paper labyrinth, a woman sat at a heavy oak desk. She was not what he had expected. He had pictured someone frail, perhaps with the perpetually worried expression of a creature about to be trod upon. This woman was still. Her brown hair was pinned up in a simple, severe knot, and she wore a dress of a dark, indeterminate color, practical and unadorned. She was not looking up. Her head was bent over a large, open book, her fingers tracing the lines of a diagram. She was utterly absorbed. He was present, and she was absent. He was there, and she was not there. He cleared his throat. Her head lifted slowly. Her eyes were gray, the color of a winter sea, and they held not the flustered panic he'd anticipated, but a calm, assessing intelligence. There was no apology in her gaze, no deference. She simply looked at him, waiting. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice sounding overloud in the silence. "I was just browsing." "You are welcome to," she said. Her voice was low and even, without inflection. She did not smile. Her gaze dropped back to her book as if he were of no more consequence than a draft from the door. This was unexpected. It was, frankly, irritating. He was the Duke of Blackwood. Even in disguise, he was accustomed to commanding a certain degree of attention, of eliciting a response. To be so thoroughly and immediately dismissed was a novel experience. He began to move through the narrow aisles, his initial mission of clinical assessment now tinged with a nettling curiosity. The chaos, he began to realize, was not chaos at all. It was an arcane system of organization. A section on botany bled into herbalism, which then flowed into treatises on agricultural theory. A shelf of Greek philosophy stood beside books on celestial navigation. It was the library of a single voracious mind, not a merchant. He pulled a slim volume from a shelf. It was a collection of Roman poetry, the Latin text worn with use. Inside the cover, in a neat, precise hand, were marginalia, corrections to the printed text, cross-references to other works, a sharp, insightful question posed in the white space. He looked over at her. She was still bent over her book, a picture of serene concentration. Who was this woman? This failing tenant, this purveyor of kindness and debt? The bell on the door chimed again. A small, grubby child entered, no older than 7, clutching a torn picture book. The boy hesitated, intimidated by the towering shelves and the silence. Miss Vance looked up, and for the first time, Alistair saw her expression change. The cool neutrality vanished, replaced by a gentle warmth that softened the severe lines of her face. "Thomas," she said softly, "did you enjoy the dragons?" The boy nodded, shuffling forward and placing the book on her desk. "Me mom says to thank you, and she sent this." He held out a small, lumpy cloth bundle. Miss Vance took it and untied the corners. Inside were 2 eggs. Alistair saw the transaction for what it was. This was not a sale. It was not even a rental. This was a barter system born of poverty, an exchange of stories for sustenance. It was the very definition of the inefficiency he despised. Kindness as currency. "They are fine eggs," she said, her voice gentle. "Tell your mother I am very grateful." She then turned and retrieved another book from a low shelf, its cover bright with color. "This one is about a ship that sails to the moon. I think you will like it." The boy's eyes widened. He took the book as if it were treasure, whispered a thank you, and scurried out of the shop. Miss Vance wrapped the eggs carefully and placed them in a drawer. When she looked up, her gaze met Alistair's. He had been staring. He realized, his observation undisguised. He expected a flicker of defensiveness, of shame at her poverty being witnessed. He saw none. Her expression was once again coolly neutral, but there was a challenge in her gray eyes. It was a silent, powerful statement. "This is my world. These are my rules. Judge them if you will." He felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. It was the feeling of a man standing on what he thought was solid ground, only to feel it shift beneath his feet. He had come here to confirm a simple fact, that this woman was a poor manager, a sentimental fool whose business was doomed to fail. And while the evidence of failure was all around him, the woman herself did not fit the calculation. He walked to the desk, placing the book of Roman poetry before her. "The notes," he said, his tone more abrupt than he intended. "They are yours?" She glanced at the book. "They are." "You disagree with Henderson's translation of the Third Ode." It was not a question. A flicker of something interest perhaps entered her eyes. Henderson was a classicist of great repute, but he was also a romantic. He valued lyricism over accuracy. He inserts a nightingale where Horace clearly intended a common thrush, because a nightingale is more poetic. I find it imprecise. Alistair stared at her. Imprecise. It was his own word, his own core criticism of the world. To hear it from her, in this context, was deeply unsettling. The thrush is a less elegant bird, he countered, testing her. It is the truer bird, she replied without hesitation. Truth has its own elegance. He stood there for a long moment, the scent of old paper and beeswax filling his senses. He had come to Lowick to close a book. Instead, he had found a single fascinating page that he did not in the least understand. The woman was an anomaly, a scholar masquerading as a shopkeeper, a logician trading in sentiment. His tidy assessment was in ruins, but Alistair was not a man to be swayed by a single conversation. Anomaly or not, the facts remained. The debt was real, the disrepair was evident, the business model was unsustainable. His initial judgment, he concluded, was not wrong, merely incomplete. She was not a flustered fool, but an intelligent one, which was perhaps worse. Her intelligence was being wasted, squandered on a hopeless cause. He left the shop without another word, the bell chiming his departure. His course of action, he decided, had not changed. It had simply become more regrettable. He would return to London. He would instruct Pembroke to proceed. The logic of the situation was unaltered. It was only as his carriage rattled away from Lowick that he acknowledged the inchoate discomfort that had taken root in his mind. It was the feeling of a perfectly balanced equation that had been disturbed by the introduction of an unknown variable. The variable had a name, Elara Vance, and she had gray eyes that saw the difference between a nightingale and a thrush. The letter arrived a week later. It was delivered not by the common post, but by a courier from a London solicitor's office. Elara recognized the crisp, expensive paper, the precise black ink, the cold authority of the seal. She did not need to break it to know it contained a verdict. She had been expecting it. Ever since the stranger had visited her shop, she had felt a change in the air. He had not been a casual browser. There was a stillness about him, an unnerving intensity in his gaze as he observed her world. He saw the dust and the debt. She knew. He saw the exchange of eggs for stories. He had seen it all, through the lens of a world she did not inhabit, a world of ledgers and clean, sharp lines. She had met his judgment with her own quiet defiance, but she was not naive. She knew that defiance was a luxury she could ill afford. She placed the letter on her desk, beside the account book, whose columns refused to balance. For a long moment, she simply looked at it. It was a physical manifestation of the forces that governed her life, forces of ownership, of law, of a commerce that had no room for a woman trading books for eggs. With steady hands, she broke the wax seal. The script was as cold and elegant as the paper. It was not a letter of eviction, not yet. It was something colder, something more exquisitely cruel. It was a proposal, framed as an act of magnanimous consideration from the new landlord, His Grace the Duke of Blackwood. Her breath caught. The Duke. So that was who the stranger had been. The letter outlined new terms for her tenancy. The rent was to be doubled, effective immediately, to bring it in line with market rates. A schedule for the repayment of all arrears, with interest, was to be submitted for approval within the fortnight. All repairs to the property were now her sole responsibility. The tone was impeccable, a masterpiece of legal prose that conveyed, with chilling politeness, the utter impossibility of her position. It was not an eviction notice. It was a carefully constructed cage, designed so that she would be the one to turn the key. It offered her the illusion of choice, while removing all possibility of success. She read the letter once. Then she read it again, the words settling like ice in her veins. She felt the insult of it keenly. It was not just a business document. It was a judgment on her character. It assumed her weakness. It presumed her defeat. The Duke, this unseen, powerful man, had looked at her life's work, at the legacy of her father and grandfather, and had written it off with the flick of a pen. He had seen the kindness and deemed it a fatal flaw. He had seen the barter and called it a failure. He had not seen the boy who had no other access to books. He had not seen the scholarship in the margins. He had not seen the truth. He had only seen the thrush and wished it were a nightingale. Something inside her, a quiet, resilient core that had weathered years of hardship, did not break. It hardened. There was no outrage, no tears. Anger was a fire that consumed precious energy, and she had none to spare. What she felt was a profound, cold clarity. A door, one she hadn't even known was open, quietly swung shut in her mind. She stood up from her desk and walked to the front window of the shop. The afternoon sun was turning the dust motes to gold. Outside, the life of Loic went on. Mrs. Gable from the bakery was sweeping her stoop. Young Thomas was sitting on the fountain's edge, lost in his book about a ship that sailed to the moon. Her world. Small, precarious, and utterly her own. The Duke of Blackwood had presented her with an equation designed to be unsolvable. He expected her to surrender to its logic. She would not. She would change the variables. She folded the letter with meticulous care, creasing the paper along its original lines. She did not tear it. She did not burn it. She placed it inside her ledger, a bookmark in the story of her debt. It would serve as a reminder, not of his power, but of his mistake. That evening, she did not pore over her accounts with the usual despair. Instead, she took out a fresh sheet of paper and a sharpened pencil. She began to make a new set of calculations. She inventoried her assets, not the monetary ones, for they were negligible. She listed her true capital, the trust of the townspeople, her knowledge of rare books, the large, unused storeroom at the back of the shop, the collection of first editions her grandfather had acquired, which she had always considered too precious to sell. Her kindness was not a liability. It was a line of credit. Her scholarship was not a hobby. It was a marketable skill. The Duke had seen only the failing bookshop. He had failed to see the potential for a library, a school, a center of community. He had made a classic error of the powerful. He had mistaken stillness for surrender. The next morning, a new sign appeared in the window of Vance's volumes, written in her own elegant, precise hand. It read, "The Loic Lending Library. Subscriptions available. Inquire within. Do." Alistair did not think of Loic for a month. He had set the wheels in motion, and he trusted the machinery of law and commerce to do its work. He expected to receive a letter from Pembroke at any time, informing him that Miss Vance had vacated the premises. He would then sell the building to Lord Fitzwilliam, a neighboring landowner who had already made a rapacious offer, and the entire untidy business would be concluded. But the letter from Pembroke did not arrive. Instead, what arrived was silence, an unaccountable, administrative silence. After 5 weeks, it began to prick at Alistair's sense of order. He dispatched a short, curt note to his solicitor. "What is the status of the Loic property?" Pembroke's reply was prompt and, to Alistair's mind, deeply perplexing. "Your Grace, regarding the Loic property, Miss Vance has remitted payment for the arrears, in full. Furthermore, she has paid the rent for the next quarter in advance, at the new rate stipulated in your letter. She has also commissioned a roofer to repair the leak over the east wall. She submitted no repayment schedule for my approval. She simply paid." Alistair read the letter twice. He felt a jolt, as if he had missed a step in a familiar staircase. It was impossible. The woman did not have the means. He had seen the state of her shop. He had witnessed her trading books for eggs. Where could she possibly have acquired such a sum? Had she a secret benefactor? Had she sold a family heirloom? The thought was strangely displeasing. He wrote back immediately. "Investigate the source of the funds, Pembroke. I want to know how this was accomplished." The investigation was another of Pembroke's master classes in quiet dissent. The report was factual, dry, and utterly devoid of the salacious discovery Alistair had half expected. Miss Vance had not found a wealthy patron. She had, it seemed, simply gone to work. "Miss Vance has converted a portion of her shop into a lending library," Pembroke wrote. The subscription fee is modest, but it appears nearly every literate family in the district has joined. She has also begun offering evening lessons in literacy and bookkeeping to local merchants. Furthermore, she has entered into a correspondence with several collectors in Oxford, appraising and selling a number of rare volumes from her personal stock. The funds, it appears, are entirely her own, legitimately earned. Alistair put the letter down on his desk. He stared out the window at the manicured perfection of his London square. The image of the bookshop rose in his mind. The dusty light, the towering shelves, the quiet woman with the assessing gray eyes. He had presented her with a problem she could not solve. She had responded by rewriting the entire equation. It was galling. It was brilliant. He found himself thinking about her at odd hours. He thought about the lending library, a simple, elegant solution that leveraged her community's trust. He thought about the evening lessons, a way to monetize her intellect directly. He thought about the sale of her rare books, a painful but necessary sacrifice of capital assets to secure her position. Each move was logical, strategic, and executed with a quiet efficiency that he could not help but admire. He had intended to break her. Instead, he had galvanized her. His contempt had been the catalyst for her triumph. The irony was as bitter as it was undeniable. A new feeling began to stir within him, something beyond the initial irritation and grudging respect. It was curiosity, a deep, gnawing need to understand the mind that had so thoroughly outmaneuvered him. He had dismissed her as a creature of sentiment, but her response had been a masterpiece of unsentimental strategy. He began to notice her absence from his thoughts, and then noticed that he was noticing it. The world of London, with its political machinations and social obligations, seemed suddenly flat, monochromatic. He found his mind drifting back to the shop, to the smell of old paper, to the quiet intensity of her concentration. He remembered the marginalia in the book of poetry. Truth has its own elegance. He became obsessed with the details. He wrote to Pembroke again, this time with a different set of questions. What did the new sign look like? How many people attended her evening classes? Which books had she sold? Pembroke's replies were always prompt, always factual. The new sign is of painted wood, in a dark blue, very tasteful. There are 12 regular attendees in her classes, including the baker's son and the blacksmith. She sold a first edition of Milton and a set of botanical prints by Besler. Each detail was a small, sharp pinprick to his pride, his certainty. He had looked at Alara Vance and seen only a liability. He had failed to see the asset she was to her community. He had failed to see the formidable mind hidden behind her quiet demeanor. He had failed, in a way he was only beginning to comprehend, to see her at all. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in May. He was in his study, reviewing a proposal for a new canal, a project of immense scale and complexity. The figures were elegant, the projections sound. It was the sort of work he normally savored, but his mind was not on it. He found himself thinking of the 2 eggs on her desk. He had seen it as a symbol of her failure, a pathetic, unsustainable transaction. Now, he saw it differently. He saw it as a symbol of a different kind of economy, one built not on coin but on connection, on mutual support. The boy received a book he could not afford. His mother paid with what she had. Miss Vance received food she needed, and the entire community was enriched by the circulation of knowledge and goodwill. It was not inefficient. It was simply humane. His initial judgment echoed in his mind. Her kindness will be exploited. He had been the one who had tried to exploit it. He had tried to weaponize her assumed vulnerability against her, and he had failed, spectacularly. He stood up and walked to his desk. He unlocked a drawer and took out the file on the Lowick property. He found his copy of the letter he had sent her. He read it again, but this time he imagined her reading it. He felt the cold shock of the words. He felt the calculated cruelty of the terms. He saw the letter not as a business proposal, but as an act of profound disrespect, an insult delivered from a great height, and he felt a hot, unfamiliar shame wash over him. It was a profound, seismic shift in his understanding of the world. His entire life had been built on the principle of seeing people and things for what they were. of stripping away sentiment to get to the hard, quantifiable truth. But he had looked at Alara Vance and had been utterly, comprehensively blind. He had seen the ledger and missed the literature. He thought about her quiet, steady gaze. He thought about her simple, devastating statement. Truth has its own elegance. He had been living a life of elegant lies, convinced of his own clear-sightedness. "Pembroke," he said, his voice sharp, to the empty room. He rang the bell for his valet. "Have my carriage made ready. I am going to Lowick." This time, he would not go in disguise. He would go as himself, not to pass judgment, but to receive it. The journey to Lowick was an exercise in sustained self-recrimination. Alistair sat in his well-sprung carriage, the familiar landscape rushing past the window, but he saw none of it. He saw only the interior of a dusty bookshop and the cool gray eyes of the woman he had so profoundly misjudged. He rehearsed what he would say, composing speeches of apology in his mind, only to discard them as inadequate and self-serving. How did a man like him, a man who dealt in facts and figures, apologize for a failure of perception? How did one atone for the sin of not truly seeing? He had been arrogant. He had been a fool. The words were simple, but the reality of them was a heavy, unfamiliar weight in his chest. When he arrived, the change in the town was palpable. There was a new energy on the main street, a sense of purpose that had been absent before. And its epicenter was the bookshop. The sign, as Pembroke had reported, was a tasteful dark blue. The windows shone, and the display was no longer sparse but curated, with a clever arrangement of books around a central theme of travels and discoveries. He pushed open the door. The bell chimed, the same tinny sound, but the atmosphere within was transformed. The shop was still full of books, but the precarious towers had been tamed. The canyons were wider, the lighting brighter. In the center of the room, several people were browsing, their quiet murmurs a gentle hum of activity. The air of a memorial was gone. This was a place of life. He saw her at the back of the shop, in what had once been a cluttered storeroom. The space had been cleared and whitewashed. Shelves lined the walls, filled with numbered volumes. This was the lending library. Ilara stood at a lectern, not speaking to a class, but consulting a large atlas, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wore the same simple, dark dress, but she seemed different, taller, more solid. She was not a woman hiding from the world. She was a woman commanding her small corner of it. He walked towards her, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden floorboards. The other patrons glanced at him, their curiosity piqued by his formal attire, his ducal bearing. He ignored them. His focus was entirely on her. She looked up as he approached. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition, the only sign of surprise. The cool neutrality was back, but now it was layered with something else, a wariness, a formidable, earned reserve. She did not speak. She simply waited. He stopped a few feet from her. The rehearsed speeches vanished from his mind, leaving only the stark, uncomfortable truth. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice lower than he intended. "I have come," he faltered. "To inspect your investment, Your Grace?" she finished for him. Her tone was not insolent, merely factual. There was an edge of ice in the words. The title, from her lips, sounded like an accusation. "No," he said. "I have come to apologize." A flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. She remained silent, her stillness a powerful form of interrogation. She was making him work for this. He knew he deserved it. "I was wrong," he said, the words feeling stark and inadequate. "My assessment of you, of this establishment, of this entire situation, was founded on a bedrock of arrogance and ignorance. I am profoundly sorry for the letter I sent. It was an insult. There is no other word for it." He had expected a reaction, a softening perhaps, or a sharp, angry retort. He got neither. She simply inclined her head. A gesture of acknowledgement so slight, it was almost imperceptible. "You have a remarkable mind, Miss Vance," he continued, the words coming more easily now that the first hurdle was passed. "You have a talent for business that I completely failed to recognize. What you have accomplished here is extraordinary. I did what was necessary for survival, Your Grace, she said, her voice even. You provided the impetus. The quiet condemnation in that statement was more effective than any shout. He had been the wolf at the door, and she was crediting him for teaching her how to build a better lock. He took a step closer. I did not come here merely to apologize. I came to make a proposal, a different one. He reached into his coat and produced a document. It was not a letter, but a deed. I am returning ownership of this building to you. It should have been your family's in the first place. My cousin's failure to arrange it is a wrong I can at least set right. He held it out to her. She looked at the document, then back at his face. She did not take it. Why? She asked. It was a genuine question. She was not asking for the sake of form. She was demanding a logical reason. Because it is just, he said. And because I was wrong. My actions were based on a flawed premise. When the premise is proven false, the conclusion must be discarded. It is a matter of simple logic. Ask. She almost smiled. It was a bare twitch of her lips, but it was there. You are a man who values logic, Your Grace. I thought I did, he admitted, but I see now that my logic was incomplete. It failed to account for variables, like resilience and intelligence, and the elegance of truth. He was echoing her own words back to her, and he knew she recognized it. At that moment, the bell on the door chimed loudly, and Lord Fitzwilliam strode in. He was a portly man with a florid face and an aura of belligerent entitlement. He stopped short upon seeing Alistair, his jaw dropping. Blackwood, what in God's name are you doing here? He then caught sight of Alara, and his expression curdled into a sneer. Don't tell me you're still trying to reason with the woman. I told you, my offer for the building stands. We'll have her out in a week. Alistair felt a surge of cold fury. He turned to face Fitzwilliam, his full height and ducal authority settling on him like a mantle. Lord Fitzwilliam, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You are mistaken. There is no offer. This building is not for sale. Fitzwilliam blustered. But, you said, your solicitor implied. My solicitor implied nothing, you inferred. And you did so incorrectly, Alistair said, stepping between Fitzwilliam and Alara, a subtle, protective movement. Furthermore, Miss Vance is not merely a tenant. She is the proprietor of the most successful new enterprise in this district, an enterprise in which I am taking a considerable personal and financial interest. So I will thank you to address her with the respect she is due. He looked at Alara. Miss Vance is the owner of this property. The deed is being transferred to her name. Fitzwilliam's face went from red to purple. He looked from Alistair's implacable expression to Alara's calm, unreadable one. He saw a wall he could not breach. With a strangled noise of frustration, he turned and stormed out of the shop, slamming the door behind him. The shop was silent again. The other patrons were pretending not to have watched the entire exchange with rapt attention. Alistair turned back to Alara. Her expression had not changed, but he saw a new light in her eyes. He held out the deed again. This time, she took it. Her fingers brushed his, a brief, cool touch that sent an unexpected jolt through him. Thank you, Your Grace, she said. The formality was still there, a shield between them. The thanks are not required, he said. This is merely the correction of an error, the first of many, I hope. He paused. My proposal was not just about the deed. I would like to fund the expansion of this library. I would like to help you acquire any books you need. Consider me your silent partner. No, not silent. Your student, perhaps. I have a great deal to learn about the economy of kindness. He had laid his cards on the table. He had confessed. He had atoned. He had made an offer. He had stripped himself of his arrogance and stood before her as a man who admitted his blindness. Now, the choice was hers. Alara looked at the deed in her hand, then at the man before her. He was not the same man who had walked into her shop weeks ago. The cold assessment in his eyes had been replaced by a searching, uncertain humility. He had seen the truth, and it had changed him. But trust, once broken, was not so easily mended. A building could be signed over with a stroke of a pen. A heart required a more careful renovation. "Your Grace," she said, her voice still quiet, still measured. "Your offer is generous. I will consider it." It was not a yes, but it was not a no. It was a beginning. Elara did not immediately accept the Duke's partnership. She accepted the deed to the building that was a matter of justice, a restoration of what was rightfully hers, but his offer of patronage, of partnership, was a more complex matter. She did not trust it. Not yet. She had seen the cold calculation in him, and she knew that men like that did not change overnight. A grand gesture was one thing. A sustained alteration of character was another entirely. So she set new terms. They were not spoken. They were not written down in a contract. They were communicated through her actions, through her continued professional reserve. She treated him not as a suitor or a savior, but as a potential investor who had yet to prove his worth. She sent him a meticulously drafted proposal for the library's expansion, complete with cost projections and a schedule of returns not in profit, but in measurable increases in local literacy and commerce. She requested his input on acquiring a collection of scientific journals, not as a favor, but as a consultation between experts. She did not capitulate. She negotiated. Alistair understood. He understood that this was his penance. He had treated her as a line on a ledger, and now she was forcing him to engage with her on those very terms, but infused with her own formidable intellect and integrity. He had wanted to shower her with ducal largesse, to fix his mistake with a grand, sweeping act of generosity. She would not allow it. She demanded something far more difficult, his consistent, respectful attention. So began the period of rebuilding. It was conducted largely through correspondence. His notes, at first stiff and formal, slowly warmed. He sent her a rare edition of Horace, not as a gift, but with a question. Page 42. Do you believe the translator captured the irony? I find his word choice imprecise. Her reply would come a week later, a detailed, scholarly analysis that was as thrilling to him as any love letter. Through their shared language of literature and logic, they began to build a bridge across the chasm of their different worlds. He began to make regular visits to Lowick. He never arrived unannounced. He would send a note ahead, asking if it would be convenient for him to call upon her at the bookshop to discuss the library's progress. He would arrive, and she would have tea and account books waiting on her desk. She was always polite, always professional. The shield of her reserve was firmly in place. But he started to notice the cracks, a flicker of a genuine smile when he brought her a particularly obscure book on cartography, the way she would forget their formal address and launch into a passionate argument about agricultural reform. The small, unconscious gestures of familiarity pushing the plate of biscuits closer to him, pouring his second cup of tea without asking. He was learning to see. He was learning to read the marginalia of her personality. He learned about her life in small fragments. He learned that her father had taught her Latin and Greek, that her mother had taught her the names of all the local wildflowers. He learned of her fierce loyalty to the people of Lowick, a community that had sustained her through years of quiet struggle. He saw that her kindness, the quality he had so arrogantly dismissed, was not a weakness but the very source of her strength. It was the foundation of the trust that had allowed her enterprise to flourish. He, in turn, found himself speaking to her of his own life, with a candor he had never shown anyone. He spoke of the immense, crushing weight of his duties, the loneliness of his position, the sterile world of politics and power that felt increasingly hollow. He confessed that his obsession with logic and efficiency was a defense against the messy, unpredictable nature of human emotion, which he had always feared he did not understand. "One does not need to understand it," she told him one rainy afternoon, looking out the shop window. "One merely needs to respect its existence, like gravity." Their partnership deepened. The library expanded. The bookshop became a vibrant intellectual hub for the entire county. And slowly, painstakingly, the walls between them began to come down. The formal "Your Grace" and Miss Vance gave way to Alistair and Elara. Their business meetings bled into long conversations that lasted until dusk, the scent of old books and brewing tea mingling in the quiet air. The final brick in the wall was removed by an external threat. Lord Fitzwilliam, still smarting from his public humiliation, had not given up. He began a campaign of petty harassment, challenging the property lines of the bookshop, complaining to the local magistrate about the rabble attracted by the evening classes. Alistair dealt with it swiftly and ruthlessly. He did not use threats or overt displays of power. He used his own particular skills. He initiated a meticulous audit of Fitzwilliam's estate management, uncovering a host of irregularities and long-neglected duties to his tenants. He presented the findings to Fitzwilliam privately, along with the suggestion that his time would be better spent putting his own house in order. Fitzwilliam, faced with the cold, hard logic of his own precarious position, retreated. The harassment stopped overnight. When Alistair told Ilara what he had done, she looked at him with a new expression in her gray eyes. It was a look of complete and profound understanding. "You used your power not to crush him, but to correct him," she said softly. "You taught me the difference," he replied. That evening, as he was preparing to leave, she did something she had never done before. She walked with him to the door of the shop. The last of the evening light was filtering through the windows, illuminating the world they had built together. "Alistair," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Your proposal of partnership, I believe I am ready to accept it now, in all its forms." He turned to face her. The shield was gone. In her eyes, he saw not wariness, but an open, steady trust. He saw a home. He did not make a grand declaration. The time for grand gestures was past. He simply reached out and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, a perfect, logical fit. "I was hoping you would," he said. A year later, the bookshop was more than just a success. It was an institution. Vance's volumes and the Lowick Library were known throughout the region. Ilara was no longer the quiet, overlooked spinster, but a respected and influential figure, a woman whose opinion was sought on matters of education and commerce. Alistair had changed too. The cold, detached Duke was gone. He still valued logic, but it was a logic tempered by compassion, an efficiency guided by a sense of human purpose. He spent more and more of his time in Lowick, finding more satisfaction in discussing the library's budget with Ilara than in debating policy in the House of Lords. One crisp autumn evening, they sat together in the back room of the shop, the library, long after the last patron had gone home. A fire crackled in the hearth. Ilara was reading, her head resting against his shoulder. Alistair was not reading. He was simply watching the firelight play on her face, on the peaceful, intelligent lines of her features. He thought back to that first day, to his cold, arrogant assessment of her. Her kindness will be exploited. He had been so certain, so utterly convinced of his own superior judgment. He had looked at this brilliant, resilient woman and seen nothing but a problem to be solved, a liability to be excised. Now, he looked at her and saw his entire world. He saw his partner, his confidant, his intellectual equal. He saw the woman who had taught him how to see, not just with his eyes, but with his heart. She looked up, as if sensing his thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her gray eyes soft in the firelight. "I was thinking about nightingales and thrushes," he said softly. A slow smile spread across her face. She understood completely. "And have you developed a preference?" "I have," he said, leaning in to kiss her. "I have learned that the truest bird sings the most beautiful song." Their life together was not a grand opera. It was a quiet, elegant prose, written in a steady, intelligent hand. It was a life built not on titles or wealth, but on a shared understanding, a mutual respect, and the simple, profound truth that the greatest asset a person can possess is a heart that is truly seen by another. In the quiet bookshop in the heart of Lowick, the Duke, who believed only in ledgers, had finally learned to read the language of the human soul, and he found it had its own undeniable logic. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. The Duke's journey was one from arrogance to humility, all because he finally learned to pay attention. Tell me in the comments, if you were a Lara, what one condition would you have explicitly added to his proposal of partnership? I hope you enjoyed your time with us. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support allows us to continue bringing these worlds to life. Next week, a different kind of bargain. A botanist in disgrace, a reclusive earl with a garden full of secrets, and a rare orchid that blooms only once a century, and only for a true heart. They arrive here, in this quiet little corner of the world, whenever they are ready.